This is the third video on the debt limit, the statutory limit on public debt. The excerpts today have been culled from these PDFs stretching back to 2011 from letters from the Treasury Secretary to congressional leaders, and the topics today are borrowing, full faith and credit, creditworthiness, taxes, default, restoration, and the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund, and the Postal Service Retiree Health Benefits Fund. It is important to point out that extending borrowing authority does not increase government spending. Increasing the debt limit does not authorize new spending commitments. It simply allows the government to pay for expenditures Congress has already approved. The American public expects its leaders to put an end to governing by crisis and to focus on promoting economic growth and job creation. Note: people are going to do business with or without government. Note: with the debt limit raised, I am supposing the USA could borrow anything and are not tied to just exchanging Treasury bonds for Federal Reserve notes. The U.S. could borrow gold, silver, British pounds, Italian lira, Mexican pesos, Russian rubles, or Chinese yuan. That is a further disclaimer on the Federal Reserve being the main problem. Because again, they could borrow anything if the debt limit, in relation to dollars, if the debt limit is raised, I believe. It is important to note that increasing the debt limit does not increase spending or authorize new spending. Rather, it simply permits the United States to continue to honor pre-existing commitments to our citizens, businesses, and investors here and around the world. These commitments were already approved by Congress, and honoring them is not optional. Well, honoring them is not optional. Okay. It is difficult to forecast with any certainty when Treasury will exhaust its borrowing authority. Note: with an infinite capacity to suck, I would say the certainty any exhaustion will come only when we are all empty exoskeletons. Note: saying that a part of the USA that is seemingly vital is on the verge of exhaustion is alarming. Subset: Byzantine shenanigans. The President signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which appropriates $118 billion for the Highway Trust Fund. Under 26 U.S.C. Section 9601, these funds must be transferred into the Highway Trust Fund within 1 month after the enactment of the legislation, and a transfer will be completed on December 15th. Promptly thereafter, the funds will be invested in non-marketable Treasury securities subject to the debt limit. While I have a high degree of confidence that Treasury will be able to finance the U.S. government through December 15th and complete the Highway Trust Fund investment, there are scenarios in which Treasury would be left with insufficient remaining resources to continue to finance the operations of the U.S. government beyond this date. Note: so money gets approved to spend for one thing, then promptly gets diverted to another. There is no credible budget plan that would allow the government to avoid a debt limit increase. Note: Lord have mercy. If we have insufficient cash on hand, it would be impossible for the United States of America to meet all its obligations for the first time in our history. For this reason, I respectfully urge Congress to act immediately to meet its responsibility by extending the nation's borrowing authority. Note: yeah, imagine that. No cash on hand means you can't pay your bills. Real rocket scientists leading our republic. Operating the United States government with no borrowing authority and with only the cash on hand on a given day would be profoundly irresponsible. Note: why would that be? Counting on being lent to is not prudent nor responsible. It is a mark of dependency. Full faith and credit. Note, they know what they are doing. This is not the Federal Reserve in the mix. This is the Treasury of the Executive Department talking to the Legislative Department directly. And continually, letter after letter, they emphasize to Congress that this is all based on the full faith and credit. Protecting the full faith and credit of the United States is the responsibility of Congress, because only Congress can extend the nation's borrowing authority. Protecting the full faith and credit of the United States is the responsibility of Congress, because only Congress can extend a nation's borrowing authority. Failure to meet that responsibility would cause irreparable harm to the American economy. Note, again, the Treasury Secretary makes clear who is in charge: Congress, and not the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a tool. Note, and again, this is a soft-veiled threat of irreparable harm if the Congress does not extend the USA's borrowing authority. I respectfully urge Congress to act promptly to protect the full faith and credit of the United States. A default will call into question for the first time the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Protecting the full faith and credit of the United States is the responsibility of Congress, because only Congress can extend the nation's borrowing authority. Note, this bears placing emphasis on. It is not the President nor administration who is responsible for protecting our purse. It is Congress. Forget the President, focus on Congress. Protecting the full faith and credit of the United States is the responsibility of Congress, because only Congress can extend the nation's borrowing authority. Note, how about the U.S. do some protecting without extending its own borrowing authority? I respectfully urge Congress to protect the full faith and credit of the United States by acting to increase the statutory debt limit as soon as possible. Nevertheless, I hope we can all agree that we should not and must not gamble with the full faith and credit of the United States. The consequences of miscalculation are too grave. The full faith and credit of the United States is too precious an asset to risk. Note, apparently it is not too precious an asset to risk. Creditworthiness. The creditworthiness of the United States is an essential underpinning of our strength as a nation. It is not a bargaining chip to be used for partisan political ends. The confidence of citizens and investors here and around the world that the United States stands fully behind its legal obligations is a unique national asset. Note, interesting warning, if our creditworthiness is such a unique national asset, perhaps it would be good to follow the legal obligation of the debt limit, to build confidence of the citizens and investors here and around the world. Congress should act as soon as possible to protect America's good credit by extending normal borrowing authority well before any risk of default becomes imminent. Note, at what point does protection of America's good credit comprise not running up on and extending the debt limit arbitrarily? Congress should act sooner rather than later to protect America's good credit and avoid the potentially catastrophic consequences of failing to act until it's too late. The creditworthiness of the United States is not a bargaining chip, and I again urge Congress to address this matter without controversy or brinksmanship. Note, one thing is for sure, the Treasury Secretaries have been diligent in warning Congress, and not one word about the Federal Reserve. As I have said in my confirmation hearing, honoring the full faith and credit of our outstanding debt is a critical commitment. I encourage Congress to raise the debt limit at the first opportunity so that we can proceed with our joint priorities. Steve Mnuchin. Note, isn't that nice? The full faith and credit of the USA is one priority, and that Steve Mnuchin's honor is another priority, and that we can all share a joint priority. Splendid. What a republic. Taxes, including the unpredictability of tax receipts, in light of the unpredictability of tax refund payments. The debt limit is the total amount of money that the United States government is authorized to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations, including tax refunds. Note, holy Jehoshaphat, they want to raise the debt limit so they can borrow to pay legal obligations, including tax refunds, which was money paid by citizens in the first place, but now they are entitled to a partial refund, and the U.S. government does not have the money, so it has to borrow to pay the refunds. Holy sheet. Including the unpredictability of tax receipts. That is a repeat. Probably bears repeating also. Default. Default would effectively impose a significant and long-lasting tax on all Americans and all American businesses and could lead to the loss of millions of American jobs. Even a very short-term or limited default would have catastrophic economic consequences that would last for decades. Any default on the legal obligations of the United States is unthinkable and must be avoided. Note, if it were unthinkable, it would not be a current topic, and maybe the time to avoid this situation is before the debt limit is ran up on. If we have insufficient cash on hand, it would be impossible for the United States of America to meet all its obligations for the first time in our history. September 25th, 2013. Note, this is untrue, as noted on the government's website. The USA has been in default before, though the first example reaches back to the early 1800s, and there has been at least one other example. This has been said in multiple letters and multiple excerpts that I've read today. And again, it is untrue, not a major sticking point, and it amounts to a soft threat based on a false premise, because we have been in default before. A default would inflict catastrophic, far-reaching damage to our nation's economy, significantly reducing growth and increasing unemployment. A default would also lead to a sharp decline in household wealth, further harming economic growth. Note, as it should. Failure to act promptly could also result in substantial disruptions to financial markets, as heightened uncertainty can exacerbate volatility and erode investor confidence. Note, should markets really be tied to success or failure based on whether the U.S. can raise its own debt limit? Should the word capitalism be used to describe the USA, when at the root, the influx of money is not the result of markup or profit-taking, it is based on Treasury bond debt being issued? Failure to meet the government's obligations would cause irreparable harm to the U.S. economy, the livelihoods of all Americans, and global financial stability. Note, geez, nothing to worry about then, eh? Default by the United States on its obligations would have a catastrophic economic impact that would be felt by every American. For these reasons, default by the United States is unthinkable. Note, apparently it is not unthinkable, and is something you stupid sons of bitches spend quite a time worrying about. Restoration. Treasury has fully restored the federal fund accounts to the positions they would have been in had there not been a debt issuance suspension period. By law, the CSRDF and G Fund will be made whole once the debt limit is increased. By law, the CSRDF and PSRHB will be made whole once the debt limit is increased or suspended. By law, the G Fund will be made whole once the debt limit is increased or suspended. Note, what if the debt limit is not increased or suspended? What howls would erupt from federal employees, civil servants, and their dependents? Alright, and that is the two major players that are used over and over again as examples of departments and funds and people that will be immediately affected by debt limit suspensions and restorations, and that is the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund and the Postal Service Retiree Health Benefits Fund. And the CSRDF provides defined benefits to retired and disabled federal employees covered by the Civil Service Retirement System. Treasury makes approximately $6.8 billion in civil service payment benefits from the CSRDF each month. In the past, Treasury was able to free up headroom under the debt limit by entering into multi-step exchange transactions with FFB and the CSRDF, swapping obligations that do not count against the debt limit for an equal amount of Treasury securities held by the CSRDF that do not count against the debt limit. In each case, FFB used the Treasury securities that it received from the CSRDF to pay down its borrowing from Treasury. Treasury extinguished the Treasury securities received from the FFB to create headroom. The potential to use such an exchange transaction is of limited use at this time because FFB has a limited amount of obligations available to exchange. Postal Service Retirement Health Benefits Fund. The Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act of 2006 requires that investments to the PSRHBF shall be made in the same manner as investments for the CSRDF. And now, just to conclude that a little bit, this are the notes from all those PDFs and major extracts, and then from these I made extracts to determine the themes from the letters. But just looking at how this the civil servants is referred to from letter to letter. Investments for the CSRDF, provides defined benefits. How does the CSRDF debt ceiling affect that? And the main example of this is we know that the government spends a lot of money on social programs, and also on the other extreme, the military industrial complex. And a lot of this we can assume is going to the butter side, the socialist side. But really, to the degree that the civil service fund and the postal fund is mentioned and the other social programs are implied, the military industrial complex in relation to having the debt limit raised only falls under the short word like national security interest. Doesn't talk about the planes, aircraft carriers, multiple bases. For some reason that is very obscured in the raising of the debt limits. An interesting point. Alright, more videos to come.